بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Inshallah, in today's class, we are going to take the section on nursing, and this is one of the unique features of Islamic law that with the certain conditions that we're going to talk about, and of course we will make mention to the different madhahib because there are different opinions about how this is established. But when a woman breastfeeds a child, then with those certain conditions, lineage is established. Lineage is established with the child towards now his nursing mother, and then up and horizontally in the relationship schemes, and then the mother now has a new son or daughter from nursing, and then therefore there are some considerations downwards in the relationship. So we're going to talk, that's what this class is about this section. So one of the things we want to learn about is, this is one of those cases where we need to know about some of the differences of opinion, because a lot is based on nursing, whether the child is actually a child by wet nursing or not. And then we want to learn about the specifics. What does it mean that the child is nursed? Can the child be nursed from a woman who has passed, but the milk was taken from her breast while she was alive? What does it mean that the child ingests the milk of the mother? Is it the same parameters as how we define what breaks the fast, the food that enters the jawf, the body cavity? So there will be some differences. We're going to talk about that. And then, of course, we also need to know how many times does the child need to be nursed. In our method, it's 5 separate times. What constitutes a nursing, a suckling? What happens if can the child nurse on one breast and then another breast? Does that count as 2 or 1? Things like that. And then, of course, the most important, well, that stuff is very important. And then equally important, let's say, is the relationships that are now established. Who now is a haram on each other, who is an unmarriageable person. So while the topic seems simple, there actually is quite a bit of fiqh in it, because of how we come to define the timing, the sucklings, and then therefore the relationships that ensue. So inshallah, those are the main topics. I'm only going to cover this section in this class, inshallah, and we'll begin our discussion in the next clip. So we'll begin the way we normally begin, which is to turn to the words of our beloved Qadi Abi Shuja' radiallahu anhu. And he says, قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين فصل في الرضاع أو الرضاع. وإذا أرضعت المرأة بلبنها ولدا صار الرضيع ولدها بشرطين: أحدهما أن يكون له دون الحولين، والثاني أن ترضعه 5 رضعات متفرقات، ويصير زوجها أبا له، ويحرم على المرضع التزويج إليها وإلى كل من ناسبها، ويحرم عليها التزويج إلى المرضع وولده دون ما كان من درجته أو أعلى طبقة منه. Okay, let's look at the adilla. The translation, sorry. If a woman nurses a child with her milk, the child becomes akin to her own child under 2 conditions. Number 1 is that the child is less than 2 lunar years in age, and number 2 is that she nurses him 5 separate times. Her husband, so the woman who's nursing, her husband becomes akin to the father to that child, whether boy or girl. It is unlawful for a child through nursing to marry his nursing mother and her kin. It is unlawful for the mother through nursing to be married to her son through nursing and his children, but not to his siblings or ancestors. So that's what we're going to talk about. Let's look at the adilla. So, we have the hadith in Bukhari narrated by our mother Aisha, Sayyidah Aisha alayhi salam, that the Prophet alayhi salatu salam entered in upon her, and there was a man there. So the Prophet's face became a little bit concerned, yani showing his dislike. So she said to him, alayhi salatu wasalam, innahu akhi, he is my brother. So the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said, انظر من إخوانكن إنما الرضاعة من المجاعة, which is an expression to mean that which is established through nursing and it's only for when nursing is done when they are children, not for the olding. And this is, maybe I shouldn't begin with this hadith, but there is a debate within the very wide expanse of Islamic law if there is a time limit to the nursing. So Sayyidah Aisha alayhi salam, she had a unitary position called Irda' al-Kabir, that there's no age limit, whereas all of the madahib, the four main Sunni madahibs, there is an age limit. I'm going to punt that for like maybe in the middle of the discussion. I don't want to talk about that now, or else we're just going to get way off sidetracked. So I shouldn't have begun with that hadith. I apologize. This is the hadith narrated by Tirmidhi on the authority of Salama radiallahu anha. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم لا يحرم من الرضاعة إلا ما فتق الأمعاء في الثدي وكان قبل الفطام. So the Prophet ﷺ said that which is established through wet nursing is not established unless the milk is actually goes into the body cavity, or actually he doesn't say the body, al-am'a goes into the stomach and the intestines from the woman's breast, and it is before the age of fitam, of weaning, which is 2 years. So this hadith establishes two things: that how the milk has to be taken into the body, which we'll talk about because there's some fiqh involved with that. It's not exactly the same definition as Ramadan and fasting, and that it's less than 2 years. And then we have the verse in Surah Al-Baqarah 233, وَالْوَالِدَاتُ يُرْضَعْنَ أَوْلَادَهُنَّ حَوْلَيْنِ كَامِلَيْنِ لِمَنْ أَرَادَ أَن يُتِمَّ الرَّضَاعَةَ. So nursing is for 2 years, meaning 2 lunar years. So that establishes for the majority, leave aside Sayyidah Aisha alayhi salam's opinion, for the majority of the fiqh that we have inherited fiqh, al-fiqh al-mawruth, that is encapsulated our madhahib, the limit is 2 years, 2 lunar years. And then we have the hadith narrated by Ad-Daraqutni that the Prophet ﷺ said, لا رضاع إلا ما كان في الحولين. There is no wet nursing for a child who is not within the 2 year limit, which is another hadith, and actually that's found in our Hawashi literature, the hadith of Ad-Daraqutni, that establishes the 2 lunar years. And then we have the famous hadith that's narrated in Muslim, also on the authority of our mother, Lady Aisha alayhi salam, that this is an issue of nasikh and mansukh, of abrogation, that in the Quran it was revealed previously, عشر رضعات معلومات يحرمنا ثم نسخت خمس معلومات فتوفي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وهن فيما يقرأ في القرآن أي إن نسخها كان متأخر. Okay, so this is one of the famous hadith that it used to be 10 sucklings, and now it's 5 sucklings, and when the Prophet ﷺ passed to Rafiq al-A'la, it remained 5 sucklings. Okay, then we have another hadith in Muslim on the authority of al-Fadl radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تحرم الرضاعة أو الرضعات أو الرضعتان عفوا أو المصة أو المصتان. So wet nursing and lineage and all of what we're talking about is not established with 1 nursing or 1 suckling and 2 sucklings, meaning that further establishes the proof that it's got to be 5 for our madhab. However, in the other madhabs it's 1. We'll get to that. Okay. I went a little bit too far in that. I apologize. It took a little bit longer. Let's turn now to the Hashia as we begin our discussion, inshallah. Okay, so the first thing I want you to know is that, when you have any discussion, I haven't necessarily done it in this way explicitly, but I mean, it bears mentioning because there's a fruitful benefit in this case. When you have any discussion in fiqh, that is in Islamic law, you're always going to begin by a linguistic definition of a term like as-salah. What's the linguistic definition, meaning of as-salah, or at-tahara, or al-bay'a, or something like that. And then you talk about the Sharia definition. Usually, the general principle is that the linguistic meaning is broader than the Sharia meaning. So as-salah in the Arabic language means prayer, means dua, supplication, etc. And then in the Sharia usage of that word, it has taken part of that and restricted it, meaning to the actions that are open with the takbir and end with the salam. That's the kind of the textbook technical definition of prayer. Involved inside the prayer is supplication and prayer and all of those kind of things. So it's a correct usage, but the Sharia or any technical field has the right to take a term and restrict its meaning. This is a case in which the opposite has happened, in which the linguistic meaning is very, al-rada is very specific, which means a child suckling on the breast of a woman and drinking her milk. That's the linguistic, I mean, maybe I didn't do it so elegantly, but that's the linguistic meaning. But that's not the Sharia meaning, because the Sharia meaning is larger. Because the Sharia allows for an intermediary. So for example, the woman could pump her breast milk and then the child could drink it. So that establishes lineage. So that right there is outside of the linguistic meaning. Or the milk can be taken during the mother's life and the mother can pass away in Allah's rahmah, and then the child could drink that milk. That would also count. And then the suckling on the the bottle or the breast of the woman is not the only way that the milk can be ingested. So if the milk is ingested in such a way that it reaches the head or the stomach mid portion of the child, then that would satisfy the definition of suckling. Let me pick up what I mean by this in the next clip, inshallah. So in the last clip, I ended by introducing this interesting thing that's happening with this section, which is that the Sharia meaning of suckling here, or wet nursing, or breastfeeding, or even the word breastfeeding means it's very limited to a child feeding on the breast, but the Sharia meaning is actually broader. So number one is that it doesn't have to be directly from the breast. It could be, if the woman has pumped her milk in the bottle, as I said. And number two, it doesn't have to be ingested only through the mouth, is what I'm trying to say. As long as the milk reaches the stomach and intestines and or the head, then it would count for the breastfeeding. And that is a more narrower discussion, or narrower definition, than that which breaks the fast. Because we said when we talked about fasting that which breaks the fast is anything that enters the body cavity, and we said that the veins are considered part of the body cavity, not the intramuscular, shot, for example. So if the milk was given in a injection intravenously, that would not establish lineage, would not establish the wet nursing. So see how now the definitions are, they're like accordions. In this section, the linguistic meaning is large, the Sharia meaning is larger than the linguistic meaning, but still the Sharia meaning is narrower than that which breaks the fast. Okay, so it's important that you start to structure your mind in this way to understand the definitions. So again, and we'll get to it, but let me just round it out so it's clear. What establishes the lineage is that the woman's milk, whether directly through the breast or through a bottle or something like that, and the child, of course, is 2 lunar years or less, is introduced into the stomach/intestines of the child or the head. Anything that the Sharia determines are pathways to that, then that would establish the lineage, would establish the suckling rather, and that is going to be narrower than that which breaks the fast in Ramadan or outside of Ramadan. Okay, so that was one thing I wanted to mention, or a few things there. Um, okay, the woman. What constitutes the woman? The woman has to be at least 9 lunar years or older, because the Sharia determines that 9 lunar years is the minimum age of puberty. So if a child, if a girl is less than 9 and she, I don't know, for whatever medical condition starts to lactate or something like that, that would not be considered milk that establishes lineage. So she has to be at least 9 lunar years, irrespective of whether she's married or not, or she's a virgin or not. Because what's interesting in this chapter of fiqh is that there are scenarios in which a child can be a child through wet nurse of only the woman, like what I just mentioned, or only the man, which is very interesting. And I mean, this is like a little trivia factoid, so let me just jump in. So, how does a child become the son of the wet nurse without a father being present if the woman starts lactating for whatever reason and is not married? How can the child be the child of the father through wet nurse without the mother if the man had 4 wives, for example, and the child suckled from each one twice or once and reached the 5 sucklings, but not from the same mother? Then the child would be the child of the father, but not of a specific mother. I know kind of like a ridiculous scenario, but it's in the books of fiqh. Okay, so when we talk about the woman, the nine minimal lunar years, again, just showing you the consistent internal cohesiveness and consistency of our legal system. Now, he says, let me just go back to the text so I don't keep getting sidetracked. If a woman nurses a child with her milk, so we kind of talked a little bit about what those words mean, the child becomes akin to her own child under 2 conditions. So the nursing is what establishes lineage. It's one of the things that establishes lineage, and this is how also Islam grew and the families grow. Even in my own family, I found out recently that I think one of my aunts has a brother through wet nurse. I had no idea my whole my whole life. So it happens, and it's just it's a beautiful thing. It's just families kind of expand and lineage expands and things like that. Which also why things like breast milk banks in the modern world or in the modern West are highly problematic from our point of view, because then if all this milk is mixed, then that means all the lineage becomes mixed, and that becomes a problem. So the milk for us is considered like it's a part of the woman, and in it is a genetic type of package, just like with semen. Semen obviously impregnates a woman. That's how you establish lineage. It's sort of like the textbook default way that you would think about it, but it's also the same thing with the milk. And if I'm not mistaken, there's a type of DNA or something that is transferred in the breast milk of the woman. So it's like a sacred thing for us. It's a very important thing, and that's how it happens, and that's how the lineage is established, and therefore we're going to come to learn that there are certain do's and don'ts established with that. But before we get to that, he says there are 2 conditions. Number 1 is that the child is less than 2 lunar years of age. So for us, that's a restrictive issue. Actually, all of them, that's a restrictive issue, unlike the unitary position of Sayyidah Aisha, alayhi salam. And because that's a single opinion, and it's so far from the vast majority of the jurists, I don't think it's necessarily appropriate for us to talk about it more here, other than to say you need to know that exists, and in some fatwa situations, that fatwa has been given because it allows, when people are adopted or children are acquired in family homes, and and then people like convert, and there's all this dynamic going on. These type of unitary positions can help make a cohesive transition into Islam, but it's something that's a fatwa situation. It's not like something that we're going to initially teach, and therefore it has to be done with its certain parameters. But for the vast majority of fiqh, what you need to know is that it's 2 lunar years or less. Now, if the child is nursing and in the middle of the 5, sucklings, the child turns 2 lunar years, because the suckling is not necessarily a precise thing. The madhab allows that's kind of like a loophole that would be allowed. But if you're over if you get into the month if you get into the 25th lunar month, so you've passed the 2 lunar years, then there can be no, this rule does not apply. So the 2 lunar years, and then she nurses him 5 separate times. One of the things that Al-Bayjuri says in the Hashia is one of the hikmas, again, not the illah, not the ratio legis, but the hikmah of why it's 5 is that this covers the 5 senses. Hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, touching. And it's as if each suckling covers the 5. It's just a hikmah. And why is it not the illah? Well, because in the madhab of Imam Abi Hanifa radiallahu anhu and Imam Malik radiallahu anhu, one nursing is enough. So I can't say that that's the illah because, it doesn't carry through all of the scenarios. So that is a known difference of opinion. For us, it's 5, and that we read some of the adillah that covers that. But for the madhab of Imam Abi Hanifa and Malik radiallahu anhuma, and of course the fuqaha after them that follow the ijtihad of those great imams radiallahu anhum ajma'in, it's 1. So this would be an interesting scenario when it comes to legal cases in the history of Islam, in which there are different jurisdictions, different madhabs involved. I mean, we know without doubt that the greatest madhab from a numbers point of view and influence point of view is the Hanafi madhab for a whole sort of historic dynamics. And we refer to Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu as Imam al-A'zam, the great Imam. And many Muslim majority countries that came under the purview or control, either directly or indirectly, of the Ottoman Empire, many of the rules are established by the Hanafi madhab. So this is not an issue in which we're going to have the madhabs fight with one another, because if one madhab establishes a lineage and another doesn't, obviously we're going to defer to the madhab that established the lineage, except if there's some weird court case that I'm sure we can come up with a legal scenario in which, knowing that the Shafi'i madhab's threshold for the sucklings is 5 would help. Let's say that they accidentally got married. They didn't know that they were married, siblings by wet nurse, by breastfeeding. Well, the Hanafi said, this is a haram marriage. And then the Shafi'i judge will be called, I'm just making this up on the fly. And then the Shafi'i judge will be brought in to investigate and find out, they were only nursed once. So in our madhab, they're not married, so they're not related, so we can keep the marriage. Yeah, something like that. But it is a known difference of opinion, and this is one of those cases where I'm going to ask you to know this difference of opinion because it's important, because of the implications. And we'll pick up the discussion and wrap it up in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, so talking about the age of the woman that can nurse and the child and all of that, we kind of did the fiqh of that. Now we're turning to then what happens if the nursing takes place. So before we get to that, we want to talk about the 5 nursings. Now, a general fiqh principle is if there is no definition, or if there's no dabit, if there's no technical understanding based on the sharia or based on language, then the parameter is then therefore based on custom, al-urf. And this is one of those cases. So whatever is customary at a certain time in a certain place, that is, a session is called a nursing, then that is checked as 1 nursing. So if a child is on a woman's breast, for example, and if for those of you that are married or have observed this when you were younger or something like that, the child, it's not like the child latches on, nurses, and then moves. The child wiggles and does all sorts, can fall asleep. I remember my children fell asleep when they were feeding. It's a really kind of beautiful thing to see. And then they wake up and then they start feeding again, still attached to the breast. All of that would be considered 1 nursing. But if the child, nursed on the breast of a mother and, pooped on themselves or something like that, and then you had to change them, and then they came back, that would be considered a 2nd one. So what is a nursing? Quote unquote, 1 nursing, the urf, the custom, is going to determine that. Why? Because there is no sharia definition or linguistic definition, and in that case we default to the urf, and that's why urf, or custom, as we know from our usul al-fiqh, is a very important parameter for us to know. So in general, let's just give it a general, because I'm not an expert in nursing, obviously I'm not a woman, but I have my own children's observation. In general, if the child's nursing session, let's go, either you can think about the child nursing on the breast of the mother or for the bottle, because they mimic kind of the same patterns. If the child's nursing session is slightly interrupted. They burp, they hiccup, they need to, they gasp for air, they fall asleep, as I mentioned, but it's a slight thing. Then we are going to say that interruption does not negate the cohesiveness of one suckling. If they are interrupted in some of the weird examples that I gave, like they went to the bathroom or something like that, and then they return, that would be renewing, that would be a second suckling. If a child, for example, many women pump their breasts for the milk, and let's say there's a certain size of bottle that this child will go through one of them, that will be a nursing. So finishing the bottle would be one nursing. But in that particular case, they're hungry and they keep crying and they want a second one, so you introduce a second bottle, that would be a second nursing. Some children's appetite is very low, they only have half the bottle. So that's why al-urf is important, what's customary is important. And if you have children and you've observed that and you've observed the women nursing, then you will know that it's not like a set thing, and this makes sense that it's defined by the urf. Okay, and then, so now what happens based on all of that? It's kind of like the conclusion of all of this is her husband, the woman who has been breastfeeding, becomes the father to the child, whether the child is a boy or a girl. So now the child nurses from the mother, so a child nurses from his non-biological mother. This woman becomes his mother and the husband becomes the father. So therefore it is unlawful for the child, this child who has been nursing, to marry his nurse mother and her kin. So the nursing mother and her siblings are now the relatives, like the aunts and the uncles of the child. So just like I can't marry my aunt on my father or my mother's side, so the wet nursing child can't marry likewise. So it's a lineage that goes up, and then that lady's mother, and then horizontally as well. So it is unlawful for a child through nursing to marry his nursing mother and her kin. And then he says, it is unlawful for the mother through nursing to be married to her son through nursing and his children, but not to his siblings and ancestors. So the lineage that is established for the child who is nursed is broader than the lineage that is established, or the lineage implications, let's say, of the mother. So if a woman nurses a child, let's say a woman nurses a boy who's with all of the conditions, less than 2 lunar years, and the Shafi'i madhab, it's 5 separate sucklings, everyone attests to that. Obviously she's her son now, so she can't marry him. But his siblings, if he had an older brother or younger brother or whatever, that milk did not impact that relationship, right? So she could marry her son's brother through wet nursing, is what he's saying. And then the ancestors, because the nursing did not impact the ancestors, it only impacted that child. So one of the ways to think about it, in the book that I looked at, or some of well, actually it gets a little bit complicated because it kind of like mentions all of these type of lineage. So I was thinking about it and I was like, okay, well, an easier way to remember it is that the lineage that's established, lineage implications, I think is a better term, for the child are much broader than the lineage implication for the mother to the child. It's limited. And you just have to follow the relationship. So if this lady is my mother, then I can't marry my mother's, sister or something like that. I can't marry my mother's husband. Okay? So you start or I can't marry my mother's father. So that lineage implication is broader. So the child is brought into a broader family, whereas the other side is not. But there is still lineage implication for the wet nurse. So again, after the conditions, he says, rahimahullah, her husband becomes akin to a father to him or to her. So if the child is nursing and all those conditions are fulfilled, the child now has a new mother and a new father. And then it is unlawful for the child through nursing to marry his nursing mother and her kin. And it is unlawful for the mother through nursing to be married to her son through nursing and his children. So the child, and then when this child gets married, his children, because it's the same DNA, but not his siblings or ancestors. So there's a limit there that's not that does not exist on the other side of the equation. Let me just dip in here really quickly to the Hashia and see if there's anything else I wanted to mention. Um, One thing that he does do, and that I will also ask you to do, is to remember that when we talked about who is haram to marry, muharramat al-nikah, earlier in the section, that list is going to be something that we're going to invoke when we come to talk about this section. So that stuff, sometimes when you look back, you'll find the answer that you're looking for. Okay, I mean, there's really not much more to say about that other than maybe we can make a little commentary on the great danger from our perspective, from the Islamic legal perspective, on breast milk banks. And now there's a trend, or some people are trying to argue that adults breastfeeding is healthy and things like that. So obviously these carry potential disastrous problems because of the lineage implications and therefore inheritance implications that happens through that. So for us, again, just to repeat, this is something that establishes lineage. And for us, lineage it's not only an important factor, it is one of the principle, the meta principles of the Sharia, one of the maqasid of the Sharia is the protection of lineage. And everyone has a right basically to know what their lineage is, and everyone has equal right to have that lineage protected. But when you don't know who's related to who, then unbeknownst to people, even if you forget about the differences between the madhahib, unbeknownst to people, there can be incestuous relationships, and there have been people that have written about that, and there are a lot of cases, specifically in the West, in which family structure has deteriorated to such a point where this has happened, and there's technical terms for it. So this is something that we also need to invoke when we talk about the section of fiqh, because it's something that you're going to definitely come up and face, and together, inshallah, we can come up with some solutions. Okay, we'll put a pin in it there. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam wa sallallahu ala sayyidina mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, we finished the section on nursing, and we learned the rules that establish the nursing relationship when a child nurses from a woman who's not his biological mother. So as long as the child is less than 2 lunar years, and as long as there have been 5 separate sucklings, and then as long as the woman is at least 9 lunar years of age or older, so to establish her maturity, and as long as the milk that the child has ingested either directly or indirectly comes to the stomach area and intestines or the head, then that lineage is going to be established. Of course, we made a notable mention that in the madhab of Imam Abi Hanifa radiallahu anhu and Imam Malik radiallahu anhu, the condition is that it's one suckling, and I kind of made up on the fly a scenario in which that kind of difference would be important to know, but it's a suckling nonetheless. We also learned that when we talk about the suckling, or the 5 separate sucklings, or 5 separate nursings, I think is the better term, it's determined by what is customary. So there can be a minor interruption in the child, either at the breast or at the bottle, but if it's a larger interruption in general, that would then therefore separate one nursing from another nursing. So whatever is customary for that child and that woman and that age and that area that constitutes a nursing, then that's going to be the nursing. That'll be counted as 1, and then once we get to 5, then a lineage is established. Once a lineage is established, this child has now acquired a new mother, his mother through wet nursing, and father, her husband. And then her siblings, up and horizontally, become haram for that child. So that the lineage implication for the child are large. And for the mother, the lineage implications are more narrow, because now she cannot marry, obviously, the child through wet nursing, and the children, if in the case of the boy, through wet nursing. I mean, obviously, if it's a girl too, the children also would be haram. So, while there are a lot of lacuna of haram relationships that have been established, an easier way to think about it is the implications for the mother of wet nursing is larger than the implications for the child. And then he references the earlier section in this chapter of nikah about who is impermissible to marry whom, to teach you the wider implications. And then I just made a reference a couple times in modern issues of breast milk banks and kind of the dangers in that from our perspective of messing up lineage. Those are the main topics we talked about. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.